exhaustion arrived without a cause you can name. You did not exercise. You did not exert yourself. You may not have left the house. And yet by mid-afternoon, your body feels heavy in a way that has nothing to do with muscles or effort. A bone-deep fatigue that settles into the limbs and behind the eyes and produces the specific sensation that you have used up something essential without knowing what it was or where it went. If someone asked what tired you out, you would not have an answer. You might say, I did not sleep well, or I think I'm coming down with something, because those explanations are at least explanations. They give the fatigue a cause. But the truth is simpler and stranger. The fatigue arrived on schedule, produced by systems that were running all day inside a body that appeared to be doing nothing. That tiredness is real. It is not imagined. It is not laziness presenting itself as physical sensation. The physics underneath it is specific, measurable, and, once you understand it, addressable from wherever you are right now, including a chair. 3 systems inside your body converge to produce this fatigue. Each one operated without your awareness. Each one has a physical cause. And not one of them has anything to do with laziness, weakness, or age catching up with you. Your brain ran a full metabolic shift, and nobody told you it clocked in. Your brain constitutes roughly 2% of your body weight. It consumes roughly 20% of everything you eat, about 20 watts of continuous power, burning through 120 grams of glucose every day, never pausing, never throttling down, not even during sleep. Pound for pound, it is the most metabolically expensive organ you own, outpacing the heart, the liver, and the kidneys by a wide margin. When you sat in a chair this morning and did what felt like nothing, your brain was running at the same metabolic rate it runs when you are solving a complex problem. The glucose was consumed. The oxygen was burned. The ATP was spent. You just did not move your legs while spending it. In 2001, Marcus Reichle, a neurologist at Washington University in Saint Louis, discovered something that changed how neuroscience thinks about the resting brain. Reichle had been using PET scans and functional MRI for years to study brain activity during focused tasks, reading, calculating, problem solving. The standard assumption was straightforward. Give the brain a task and activity increases. Remove the task and activity decreases. The brain at rest was thought to be idling, running at low power, waiting for the next instruction. Reichle found the opposite. When subjects stopped performing tasks and simply rested in the scanner with their eyes closed, doing nothing, thinking about whatever came to mind, an entire network of brain regions activated that had been quiet during the focused work. The medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, the precuneus, the lateral temporal cortex all increased their metabolic activity during rest. The resting brain was not resting. It was running a different program, and that program was consuming as much glucose as the focused task had. The assumption that rest means reduced brain activity was wrong. Rest, for the brain, means switching from one expensive program to another expensive program. The only thing that changed was which network was doing the spending. Reichle named it the default mode network. It activates when you are not engaged in a directed external task, when you are daydreaming, planning, replaying conversations, worrying about tomorrow, thinking about what to eat, remembering something from last week, imagining a future scenario, rehearsing what you will say to someone, reviewing a regret from 30 years ago with a vividness that surprises you. The network is self-referential. It processes information about you, your past, your future, your relationships, your concerns. It runs continuously in the absence of directed attention, and its glucose consumption is comparable to, and in some studies exceeds, that of concentrated cognitive work. I find Reichle's discovery extraordinary for what it says about the experience of fatigue. The most metabolically expensive thing your brain does may not be the task you're concentrating on. It may be the worry that runs when you stop concentrating. The background program that processes your life, your losses, your fears, your unresolved questions, all day at full metabolic cost without ever asking your permission to begin. This is the physics of why sitting and worrying is exhausting. When you spent the morning in a chair, mentally planning, reviewing, scrolling through concerns, and circling the same 3 worries you have been circling for weeks, your brain was metabolically sprinting. The default mode network does not feel like work because it does not involve effort in a direction you chose. The thoughts arrive on their own. The rumination sustains itself. There is no sense of exertion because there is no sense of control. But the glucose cost is identical to performing a demanding cognitive task. The oxygen consumption is identical. The ATP expenditure is identical. And the glucose depletion is real. Your brain has no energy reserves. It cannot store glucose the way muscles can store glycogen. It depends on continuous delivery from the bloodstream, moment to moment, hour to hour. When the default mode network runs all morning at full metabolic rate, your blood glucose drops, not dramatically enough to trigger a medical alarm, but enough to contribute to the heavy, depleted sensation you feel by afternoon. The brain that was sprinting on worry drew down the same fuel supply that a brain doing focused work would have drawn down. The only difference is that the focused work would have produced something. The worry produced nothing except the fatigue of having run. Your most energy-hungry organ worked a full shift. It simply did not inform your conscious mind that the shift had started. If you have reached mid-afternoon and felt that you must have done something to be this tired, that the exhaustion makes no sense given how little you moved, the answer is that your brain consumed the energy. The 20% tax on everything you ate today was collected in full. The metabolic bill was paid. The fatigue you feel is the receipt. Gravity is the second cause. And it won because the pump was not running. Your circulatory system was designed for a body that moves. When you walk, every step compresses the deep veins in your calves, the soleus and gastrocnemius muscles squeezing the venous channels with each contraction, pushing blood upward against gravity through one-way valves toward your heart. This is called the calf muscle pump, and it is how your body was engineered to return blood from your lower half. Your heart can push blood down to your feet through arterial pressure, but it cannot efficiently pull blood back up against 4 to 5 feet of gravitational resistance. It needs the calf muscles to do that work. And for most of human evolutionary history, the calf muscles were doing it continuously because the body was walking, foraging, building, moving throughout every waking hour. When you sit still, the pump stops. Blood pools in the veins of your legs under its own weight, a process called venous stasis. The pooling begins within minutes of sitting and deepens with each hour. After 1 hour, measurable fluid has shifted from your central circulation into your lower extremities. After 2 hours, the pooling is significant enough to reduce cardiac output, the volume of blood your heart can pump per beat, by a clinically detectable amount. The volume of blood available to your heart decreases because a portion of it is parked below your knees, held there by gravity in veins that have dilated to accommodate the pooling. Your heart has less to pump forward with each beat. Cardiac output drops slightly, not dramatically, not dangerously, but measurably. And your brain, which requires roughly 750 milliliters of blood every minute, carrying the oxygen and glucose that fuel every neural operation, with almost zero tolerance for reduction, begins receiving marginally less of both. You do not feel this as low blood flow to the brain. The brain cannot report its own deprivation directly. It has no pain receptors. Instead, you feel it as fatigue, as heaviness, as the inexplicable sense that you need to rest even though you have not done anything, as a fog that makes concentration harder, decisions heavier, the distance between your chair and the kitchen longer than it should be. Reduced perfusion triggers a quiet triage. The brain down-regulates non-essential processes, narrowing concentration, decreasing motivation, reducing the subjective sense of energy to match the reduced fuel supply. You experience this triage as exhaustion. The physics is fluid dynamics. Gravity pulls blood downward. The calf pump returns it. And when the pump is stalled, your brain adjusts its operating tempo downward. For anyone over 65, the mechanics compound. Venous valves weaken with age. The one-way mechanisms that prevent blood from falling back down between pump strokes become less competent, allowing more backflow and more pooling. The veins themselves lose elasticity. dilating more readily under gravitational load, accommodating more blood in the lower legs than they should. Arterial stiffness increases, reducing the pulse pressure that helps push blood through capillary beds. The result is that blood pools faster and in greater volume in an older person sitting still than in a younger one. The same hour of sitting produces more circulatory stagnation at 65 than it did at 40, which means the fatigue from inactivity deepens with age even if nothing else changes. Perhaps your legs feel heavy by afternoon. Perhaps the fatigue concentrates below the waist, or standing up after sitting for an hour produces a moment of lightheadedness, or your ankles show mild swelling by evening that was not there in the morning. That is the calf pump deficit. Blood that should have been returned to your heart and brain was parked in your legs, and your brain adjusted its performance downward to match the reduced supply. There is a second circulatory event that compounds the pooling, and it happens every day after you eat. When you consume a meal, your body diverts a significant volume of blood to the splanchnic circulation, the network of vessels serving the stomach, intestines, and liver, to support digestion. In a young person, baroreceptors in the aortic arch and carotid sinus detect the blood pressure drop and compensate by increasing heart rate and constricting peripheral vessels, maintaining cerebral perfusion. In older adults, this baroreceptor reflex is blunted. The compensation is slower and less complete. Blood pressure can drop 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury within 30 to 75 minutes after eating, a condition called postprandial hypotension that affects up to a third of older adults. Consider the timing, lunch at noon or 1 o'clock, followed by a blood pressure drop that reaches its nadir around 2 to 3 p.m. Exactly when adenosine is peaking and the circadian dip is arriving. The blood that went to the gut to process your meal has not fully returned to the central circulation. The blood that pooled in your legs from sitting is still there. And the adenosine that has been building all day just collided with the circadian trough. 3 circulatory and chemical events arriving simultaneously at the same hour. What you have called a food coma for your entire life is not caused by the food making you sleepy. It is caused by the blood leaving your brain to digest the food at the exact hour when every other system was already pulling your alertness downward. And there is a metabolic consequence of the same stillness that stalled the pump. Mark Hamilton at the University of Houston documented what happens to leg muscles during sustained inactivity. Within hours of sitting, the enzyme lipoprotein lipase, which breaks down circulating triglycerides and facilitates glucose uptake into muscle tissue, drops to near zero activity in the leg muscles. Your muscles are the largest glucose sink in the body. When they are not contracting, they stop clearing glucose from your blood efficiently. Blood sugar rises. Insulin spikes in response. And then, because the glucose is not being taken up by inactive muscles, blood sugar drops below baseline in a reactive dip. The subjective experience of this reactive hypoglycemia is fatigue, brain fog, irritability, and difficulty concentrating. Arriving at the same afternoon hour as the circulatory deficit and compounding it. Walking for even 5 to 10 minutes reactivates lipoprotein lipase within minutes, restoring glucose clearance and stabilizing blood sugar. A chemical tide is the third cause, and it has been building since the moment you opened your eyes. Every time a cell in your brain burns ATP, the molecular fuel for every neural operation, every thought, every signal, a waste product called adenosine is left behind. Adenosine accumulates throughout the day and binds to receptors in the brain that progressively slow neural activity. This is sleep pressure, the mounting chemical signal that makes you drowsier as the hours pass. Adenosine does not care what you did with those hours. It accumulates whether you ran a marathon or sat in a chair. The brain burned ATP either way. The adenosine built up either way. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors. It does not remove the adenosine. It prevents the adenosine from binding. The molecule is still there, still accumulating, but the receptor cannot read it. This is why caffeine produces alertness and why the crash afterward is so steep. When the caffeine wears off, the accumulated adenosine that was blocked from binding floods the now unoccupied receptors all at once. The drowsiness arrives not gradually, but as a wave. All the sleep pressure that was being masked lands simultaneously. If you drink coffee in the afternoon to combat the 3 p.m. wall, you are not removing the fatigue. You are postponing it and concentrating it into a steeper crash later, which can then interfere with the deep sleep that would have cleared the adenosine overnight, leaving you with more residual fatigue the next morning. The physics of caffeine explains why it helps acutely and compounds the problem chronically. If you find that your afternoon fatigue has worsened over years of afternoon coffee, that the 3 p.m. wall is steeper now than it was when you started using caffeine to manage it, the caffeine may be part of the mechanism. It was masking the adenosine during the afternoon while preventing the deep sleep that would have cleared it overnight. The tool you used to manage the symptom was deepening the cause. By 2 to 3 in the afternoon, adenosine levels reach a concentration that collides with something hardwired into your biology, a circadian dip. Your internal clock programs a trough in alertness and core body temperature every early afternoon, roughly 12 to 14 hours before your next major sleep period. This dip occurs whether you ate lunch or not, whether you slept well or not, whether you exercised or not. It is architectural, built into the circadian waveform that your master clock generates. Notice the specific quality of 3 p.m. fatigue. It is different from the fatigue of exertion. It does not feel earned. It does not come with sore muscles or the satisfying tiredness of having done something. It arrives empty-handed, no cause, no explanation, no proportionality. You are fine at 1 o'clock. By 3, you cannot focus. The words on a page stop registering. The motivation to begin any task evaporates. The body wants to sit, or lie down, or close its eyes. And the desire is not psychological. It is a chemical signal from our brain that has accumulated enough adenosine to trick the drowsiness threshold, arriving at the exact hour when the circadian system was already pulling alertness downward. After 65, this collision hits harder for 3 specific reasons. First, overnight sleep is typically lighter and more fragmented. The glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance network that flushes metabolic debris, including adenosine, operates most efficiently during deep, slow-wave sleep. Slow-wave sleep declines with age, which means less time in the phase where adenosine clearance is most active. You carry more residual adenosine into each morning than you did at 40. The tank was not fully emptied overnight. If you wake feeling that the sleep did not restore you, that you slept, but the fatigue is still there, as if the night did not count. The residual adenosine is part of the reason. The clearance system did not finish its job. Second, the circadian rhythm's amplitude decreases with age. The peaks of alertness are lower and the troughs deeper, proportionally. The morning peak that should carry you through the first half of the day is less powerful than it was a decade ago, and the afternoon trough is a deeper valley relative to that weakened peak. The dip feels steeper because it is steeper, relative to a baseline that was already lower. Third, the total adenosine clearance capacity diminishes. The glymphatic channels narrow with age. The flow rate decreases. Each night's clearance operation removes a smaller fraction of the day's accumulation. Each morning starts with a slightly higher baseline. Each afternoon trough begins from a higher floor. The fatigue accumulates not just within each day, but across days, each incomplete clearance carrying over into the next morning, building a chronic baseline of tiredness that has nothing to do with effort or attitude. Afternoon exhaustion is not laziness. It is not deconditioning. It is a chemical tide that has been rising every day of your life, meeting a circadian trough that is deeper than it was a decade ago, in a brain that cleared less of yesterday's residue than it used to. The physics stacks against you every single afternoon. And understanding that the stack is physical, not personal, changes what the exhaustion means. 3 causes, 3 interventions. All of them work from wherever you are. What makes the afternoon fatigue so overwhelming is that the 3 causes do not merely add, they multiply. The default mode network burns glucose, which depletes the fuel supply to a brain that is already receiving less blood because the calf pump is stalled. The reduced cerebral perfusion makes the brain more sensitive to adenosine. Less oxygen means less efficient. ATP production, which means more adenosine per unit of neural activity. The adenosine accumulation triggers the circadian dip earlier and harder, which reduces motivation to move, which keeps the calf pump stalled, which further reduces perfusion. The three systems feed each other in a cycle that deepens through the afternoon, each one making the other two worse. This is why the fatigue feels disproportionate. It is not one cause. It is three causes in a feedback loop, each amplifying the others. But here's what the feedback loop also means. Breaking any one of the three loops partially breaks the others. Move the blood and the brain gets more oxygen, which makes the adenosine load less debilitating. Calm the cortisol and the sympathetic drain lifts, which frees glucose for the brain to use. Suppress the DMN and the metabolic cost of rumination drops, which reduces glucose depletion and adenosine production simultaneously. You do not need to address all three. Addressing one gives the other two less to work with. One lever moved is enough to shift the balance. Blood pooling responds to almost any muscle contraction in the lower legs. Walking is the most complete intervention, and if you can walk, walk. Even 10 minutes changes the physics measurably. Within the first 2 minutes, the calf pump reactivates and venous return increases. Within 5 minutes, cardiac output rises. Within 10 minutes, cerebral perfusion improves enough that the foggy, heavy sensation begins to lift. The effect is hydraulic. The pump turned back on, and the brain received the fuel delivery it had been operating without. But if walking is difficult today, or painful, or not possible, the physics does not require walking specifically. It requires the calf muscles to compress the deep veins, flexing your ankles, pulling your toes towards your shins, then pushing them away slowly, 10 times per foot, activates the soleus and gastrocnemius enough to generate a pressure wave in the deep veins. Blood moves upward past the one-way valves. Cardiac return improves. You can do this sitting in a chair, lying in a bed, or anywhere your ankles can move. The scale is smaller than walking. The hydraulics still work. The effect is modest, immediate, free, and available from any position your body can occupy. Adenosine and cortisol layering, the neurochemical component, responds to breathing. Throughout the day, your autonomic nervous system has been running in sympathetic mode, the alert, vigilant, energy-burning state that the default mode network's worry processing reinforces. Cortisol has been elevated. Adrenaline has been trickling. Your heart rate has been slightly faster than it needs to be for someone sitting in a chair. This sympathetic activation is an additional energy drain layered on top of the adenosine accumulation. Your body has been running in a mode appropriate for threat detection in an environment where no threat exists. Slow, deliberate breathing at roughly 6 breaths per minute activates the vagus nerve through mechanical stimulation of stretch receptors in the lungs and diaphragm. Each slow exhalation triggers baroreceptors in the aortic arch that signal the brainstem to increase parasympathetic output. Heart rate decreases, blood pressure drops slightly, cortisol production slows. The autonomic nervous system shifts from the sympathetic state that has been draining your reserves all day toward parasympathetic recovery, the state in which the body repairs, restores, and conserves energy rather than spending it. You do not need to stand for this. You do not need to move at all. 5 minutes of slow breathing, in through the nose for roughly 5 seconds, out through the mouth for roughly 5 seconds, measurably changes the hormonal environment your brain operates in. The adenosine is still there, the circadian dip is still there, but the cortisol and sympathetic activation layered on top of both lifts, and that reduction alone can be the difference between feeling unable to do anything and feeling able to do one thing. The fatigue does not vanish, but the weight of it decreases, because a portion of what you were experiencing as fatigue was actually sustained stress chemistry masquerading as tiredness. The two feel identical from the inside. The interventions that address them are completely different. Rumination, the default mode network drain, responds to directed attention. Anything that gives your prefrontal cortex a specific, non-self-referential task interrupts the DMN's self-sustaining loop. The mechanism is attentional competition, the moment you direct attention outward, toward a task, a voice, a pattern, a story that is not about you. The task-positive network activates and the DMN's activity decreases. The rumination does not need to be defeated by willpower. It needs to be displaced by a competing signal. Listening to music with full attention works, not as background, but as the thing you are doing, following a melody, noticing an instrument, tracking a rhythm. A phone call where you are following someone else's story works. Reading a single page of something absorbing works. A crossword puzzle, a card game, a jigsaw puzzle, a conversation about someone else's day, any task that requires your brain to track external sequential information, suppresses the DMN and reduces its metabolic cost. Rumination pauses. Glucose that was being burned on the worry loop becomes available for other functions. For many people, this is the single largest lever available, and it costs nothing. If you have noticed that you feel better after a phone call, or after becoming absorbed in a book, or after working on a puzzle, that the fatigue lifts disproportionately to the physical effort involved. That is the DMN being suppressed by directed attention. The task did not give you energy. It stopped your brain from spending energy it did not need to spend. 3 causes, 3 levers. Ankle pumps for the blood, slow breathing for the chemistry, directed attention for the rumination. All 3 work from a chair, all 3 work from a bed. None of them required equipment, medication, or willpower. Only the understanding that the fatigue has physical causes and the causes have physical solutions. The body that felt exhausted after doing nothing was never doing nothing. It was running a brain at full metabolic capacity, 20% of your daily calories consumed by an organ that weighs less than 3 pounds, burning glucose on a worry program it never asked your permission to start. It was fighting gravity with a stalled circulatory pump, blood pooling in your legs because the muscles that should have returned it were still, your brain quietly reducing its own operating tempo to match the diminished supply. It was accumulating a chemical tide that rises every day and clears a little less completely every night. Adenosine building toward a collision with a circadian dip that deepens with every passing year in a brain that carries more residual fatigue into each morning than it did the year before. The exhaustion is not a personal failure. It is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that something is wrong with you that is not wrong with everyone else. It is the physics of a body that was designed for continuous movement, processing a day in which it did not move. And the physics has solutions that meet you exactly where you are, not where you wish you were, not where you used to be, not where someone who does not live in your body thinks you should be. Where you are right now, wherever that is. Whatever your body can do today, there is a lever you can reach. The physics does not judge what you cannot do. It only describes what happens when you do what you can.